in junior year, I studied abroad in Paris, and I knew that I wanted to come back to the United States for the summer. So I thought, like, what would be the most interesting thing I could do that would be productive for my future in the summer? So I decided I might as well use the chance to intern in New York, which I've heard is a ton of fun, just being young in New York. And I didn't know when I get the opportunity to do that again. So I started my intern search actually kind of late, about April or May. And so I just, through a bunch of job websites, I've sort of narrowed it down to a few things that I applied for, and it turned out that I happened to get an interview at a real estate firm in Brooklyn called CPEX Real Estate. And I went there, and it was a very different operation than I expected it to be. It was a real estate brokerage, which meant that it was a very open office. Each, as the head of the company put it, selling is about thinking outside of the box. So if you put the man in the box, he won't be able to sell. So it was a very open place, and I could tell that right from the get-go. So they told me that they wanted me, and I said, okay, I think this would be an interesting experience. So I worked in the research department there, which meant that I worked on reports to compile market knowledge about the firm's specialty, which was the redevelopment of post-industrial land in Brooklyn, essentially. And I became sort of the point person for New York City's industrial business zone policy. And it might sound very technical, but actually it was really interesting because I was living in North Brooklyn at the time, right behind Williamsburg, and working in downtown Brooklyn. So I didn't even have to go into Manhattan, which was nice. And then, the areas that I was working on, making these reports about, was actually right where I was living, where I was hanging out, where I was seeing the redevelopment at the same time. So my entire summer really was about discovering New York on all the levels, and I really enjoyed it, I will say. The reports are on just various topics that our bosses would essentially dream up and think that would either fit well with our needs, the company's needs for market knowledge, or in the marketing portfolio overall, where you could say, look, we made this report, we're a smart company, you should let us be your broker. So examples where we did a report on the city's industrial business zone policy, which was sort of my thing. Then we did the parking report. We did a report on this area called East Flatbush. It has a bunch of hospitals in the middle, and we calculated how much foot traffic was drawn by the hospitals each day in order to determine whether or not the area was under-restauranted or under-retailed. So that sort of thing. And the way that the actual compilation of the reports would work is that in some instances it was very data-driven. We would go onto city websites and pull public data. In other instances, like with the parking one, the boss just threw it at us and made us figure it out ourselves. And it actually took a lot of thinking about how to find the pricing and the lot size information for all these parking lots, because there was no online public database. We couldn't walk the whole thing, obviously, but eventually we figured out via some sort of Google Maps type websites that had pictures of the decals on the front of each parking place. But actually the work that went into the reports was a very interesting process, because at the beginning, the other main intern and I, we just divvied up the reports, like, you do 50%, I'll do 50%, then we'll put it together. But I found out that involved a lot of Excel stuff, and I'm not an Excel thinker. I was screwing up spreadsheets left and right, and he spent as much time fixing my spreadsheets as I did fixing the written summaries for it. So we eventually just switched, and he did all of the data, I did all of the writing, and we worked a lot faster and came up with some good stuff. Well, some of the data collection was actually field work. For the hospital one, we did go and survey the area so we knew what we were dealing with, because otherwise it would just be a project on paper and we wouldn't have any connection to it. In that one, we did use city numbers for how much traffic there was at the bus stops and the subway stations nearby, but we also we had to do some research in the hospital figures themselves, calculate if there are this many patients there each day on average, and they might have this many visitors, how many people would that accumulate to in all the hospitals in the region, things like that. And then for the parking project, so I said earlier that we had to figure out how many parking spots and what the average price per month was in each parking place. And there's no online database of this, and when we found out that when we called the parking garages to try and just essentially be like a customer trying to find out what it was, they'd hang up on us because they'd think that we were the competition trying to get a price quote or something like that. So We did go out and walk around a few, and when we walked around, we noticed that there was a regulation that made them put signs on the front that listed the size of the parking lot and the daily price, or daily, weekly, monthly prices. So we happened to also find this website online that was a parking spot finder, and they had pictures of every single parking spot or every single parking lot in Brooklyn. And so from those pictures, we zoomed in and found the decals that had this information and compiled a report from that. And then the ones that didn't have it, we actually visited. I'd say that one of the funniest moments was in the first week. My direct boss in the research department said, okay, so everyone who comes through here has to do something to impress us. What are you going to do? And I thought he was joking at first, but then it turns out that my co-intern, he had to sing the Romanian national anthem to the entire office. So when the day came, the entire office was assembled, and I hadn't thought of anything. And then I saw on the wall that they had this framed picture, this framed document of Vince Lombardi's greatest football halftime speech ever. So the idea struck me that I took that speech, put on the music Chariots of Fire, stood up from a chair, and read it out loud at the top of my lungs, and it made such a good impression on the CEO. He loved it. And then another good time was so that sort of like shows the atmosphere of the company. It was so open, and the people there it was sort of like a family. So actually on, I believe it was 4th of July, they took us out to a baseball game in Coney Island, and afterwards we went out to bars with the whole company, and it was all on the company tab, and it was just such a fun time. Yeah, I'd say that some of the data collection, especially before I had figured out that I could switch roles sort of with my co-intern, some of the data collection was a little bit tedious. And every now and then, my direct boss would get in sort of tiffs with the upper management because they didn't understand exactly where he wanted to take a research project, and they'd just mess with it a little bit too much. So when he was in a bad mood, then it sort of cast a shadow over the research department. But in general, there really weren't that many bad moments. Living in Brooklyn was a really cool experience, I have to say. I know that it has a reputation of being the lair of obnoxious hipsters, but that depends on the neighborhood. I lived in a place called Greenpoint, which is an old Polish neighborhood that's now sort of upcoming. It's very far from the subway, so it's not that upcoming. So you can still say it's a little bit like authentic New York. And I had a really great time living up there. I think Brooklyn has one of the highest concentrations of young people in the United States, so the nightlife there was excellent. It was half to a third of the price of Manhattan nightlife and never a cover charge for anything. People there very down to earth, and I had a really good time out there actually. I lived not too far from a cool art gallery where every Wednesday night they had this sketching program called Drink and Draw, where for $10 you would have sketching materials, and like there'd be maybe 50 people there, and you all just drew things, and then there was unlimited beer from Brooklyn Brewery, which was just down the street, which I appreciated a lot. It was probably my favorite Wednesday night event ever. And then I also was part of the North Brooklyn Running Club, because I rented a room off Craigslist, and one of the guys that was in the same house as me, he was one of the heads of the North Brooklyn Running Club. So he's like, hey, you should come out with us sometime. So I went out with him, and I met a lot of cool people through it, and we ran all throughout Long Island City and North Brooklyn, and through lands of what you could call industrial decay and sort of like the modern wasteland. It actually was the Valley of Ashes from Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. So it was very interesting from that perspective too. And I saw a lot of the city and really cool things that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. And I met a lot of very interesting people through it. I would say that I actually found it through essentially a Google search that led me to a career website. And I sent in an application, and it happened to work. For people that are looking for a similar job, I would say that Tiger Tracks is okay, but I don't believe my employer was listed on Tiger Tracks, actually. I would say do do use Tiger Tracks to find some things, especially if you're looking for international internships. That's something that I didn't even know existed really, and that I believe I would have taken advantage of more if I had known that it was there in past years. But do look also at general career sites such as monster.com, careersearch.com, things like that, because they have things that you won't find on Tiger Tracks. The real estate startup, it was just that it seemed interesting in the job description, and I will say that my dad does real estate also, and so I thought that, and he always encouraged me. He said, you know, it's actually sort of an interesting industry. You probably think my job is boring, but I actually like it, so you should probably check it out one time if you get the chance. So I had encouragement from my family, and then it seemed just like an interesting way to get into New York also. I haven't taken any classes that specifically prepared me for this job, but the job itself did reinforce my learning at Princeton, because in this job, it was essentially that my position in the research department was essentially understanding the industrial business zone policy of the city, which was an exercise in local politics, putting development policy right into action and then having to see the consequences of it. So I think that part of the job really gave me a much more rounded education than I would have compared to just learning policy in the classroom in that sense. Well, first, I'll say that was the first time I ever was in the business world. I had done internships in government. I had worked actually at CVS before, but I'd never done anything in an office. And I was one of those people that was very convinced that office jobs, horrible, I'll never ever take one. And I will say that my perspective hasn't changed 100% on that. I now know that an office job isn't terrible. It depends on the office environment, but that experience also showed me that I can succeed in a business environment. It gave me a lot of confidence in that way, so that if I'm ever in a similar situation, I know that I can be confident, and especially in the interview process, and say that I have this experience that I can build on. Second, if I ever need to go into Brooklyn real estate, the people that I worked with are so incredibly well connected that I think I would be set. And then, interestingly, I just had an interview for Princeton in Asia, and I described my work experience to them, and I thought, I don't know why I'm telling them this. This is completely irrelevant to anything I'll do in Asia. I'm sure if I get the job. And then at the end of the interview, my interviewer told me, wow, just so you know, that job experience is perfect for Princeton in Asia. You will be doing, if you get the job, you'll probably be doing things just along those lines, where they throw you into a new environment. You have to come up with ideas to figure out development of these cities, things like that, because I'm applying to business positions there. So it actually has really come in handy in ways that I didn't expect.